Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining. We are going to get started here in just a moment. I am also going to be posting the community guidelines in the chat. So you're welcome to take a look and review those. We'll also be going over those in a minute. And there is the chat in the right of the screen. You're welcome to put any questions you have throughout the workshop in there, and we'll get to it at the end of the Q&A. And they come directly to us. They are private, so you won't be seeing other people's messages in the chat. Great. Awesome. Well, I just want to say hello, everyone, and welcome again to the How to Navigate Pain with Family, Friends, and Partners. My name is Kimberly. I am a Flowly guide, and I am very excited to see everyone here today. Our mission with Flowly is to empower you to feel and live better each day. To do that, we want to build a platform with an inside-out approach. The in is the Flowly experience, your sessions that teach you how to regulate your nervous system. The out are the bubbles, events, and the apparel we recently launched, so you can connect more with health-focused resources and experiences. Before we begin the workshop today, we'll review the community guidelines so we can make sure it's a safe space for us all. They are also posted in the chat for your reference. We ask that everyone speaks from the I perspective because everyone's journey is different. We ask that you respect different viewpoints because our community not only welcomes but actively listens to everyone's unique experience. We ask that you include a trigger warning when sharing about difficult experiences because our community is not only a safe space, but some people's only safe space. And with that, I would now love to lead us in a short breathing exercise to ready us for the topic ahead. So we will follow along together with the breathing guide for around 2 minutes. So get comfortable. And I will share my screen and just follow along with the breathing guide. Coming up. be our last inhale and our last exhale. Great. Thank you for being present with me through our workshop introduction. As you begin to settle back into the space around you, I would like to invite you to take notes during the workshop and keep any questions you may have for the Q&A at the end, or you can also put it in the chat on the side and we will get back to it at the end. Now I'd love to bring onto the stage a valued member, a valued and experienced provider, Dr. Jamie Arnoff. We are excited to have Dr. Arnoff lead a workshop today because Dr. Arnoff has been a frequent speaker and in health podcasts, articles, and more. As a licensed clinical psychologist, Dr. Jamie Arnoff has over 10 years of experience working with children, adolescents, and young adults with mood and anxiety disorders in multiple hospitals, residential treatment centers, and community mental health clinics. She selflessly works to validate and support individuals through physical and emotional aspects of chronic pain. Dr. Arnoff is a wealth of knowledge for various evidence-based practices to highlight individuals' strengths and help promote better understanding and tolerance of stressful thoughts. And with that, I am excited to introduce you to Dr. Jamie Arnoff.
Thank you. I am going to share my presentation with all of you so that you can follow along as I'm speaking. There we go. So yes, today we're going to be talking about navigating conversations about pain, and that's both physical and emotional pain with family, friends, partners, really anyone that I would identify as like your people, your support network. So again, please feel free to write down your questions, type them into the chat. We will kind of collect them and save them to the very end. But I wanted to start with speaking directly to the people that are in pain, maybe the people that are here, our heroes, if you will, that are tuning in, that are actively experiencing pain and are curious about wanting to, interested in starting conversations with people around them about what's going on in their life, and looking for tips and tools and tricks for how to do that. So I want to first and foremost validate those individuals because being vulnerable and sharing what I call the tough stuff, which is anything that's difficult or stressful to think about sharing, it is scary and it is uncomfortable. So again, to first and foremost validate that that is true. This presentation, the goal is to help provide some strategies to prepare for, enter into, and kind of process these conversations. And just because there's some tips and tricks laid out doesn't necessarily mean that it's still not going to be scary or difficult. So I want to validate that for you as a person in pain. And then also for the people that I will refer to as kind of the listeners, right? The people who are wanting to support a person who might be in pain in these conversations. And for people who are in pain, it can be hard to imagine even having conversations or talking about the tough stuff, because you might have an internal dialogue that says something like, it's not that bad. What you're going through isn't that bad, right? Other people might have it worse. I don't really want to seem like I'm complaining. I don't want to be a burden. And trigger warning, I'm just going to mention a little bit about my personal diagnoses as not just a psychologist, but as a person in pain. I have diagnoses of fibromyalgia and trigeminal neuralgia. So I have TN type 2. And so the right side of my face pretty much is in pain 24/7, and my body pretty much head to toe experiences a variety of different types of nerve pain. So these are voices that I've heard in my head and feel pesky to me. And so, you know, if this is something that you also experience or have similar experiences, to validate that you are not alone, and it's a very normal, although still pesky, voice that we have in our head. And in terms of this feeling of I don't want to be a burden, by sharing your pain, you are not placing a burden on someone else, but by engaging in these conversations, you're starting to lift this burden off of yourself. And you've got enough going on, You're managing these thoughts and these feelings, and doing so alone just does not need to be a part of your agenda. So when I think about all of the thoughts and related emotions and feelings, and then in addition, the physical manifestation of some of these things, maybe like depression or anxiety, but also just chronic pain in general, I think of a brain kind of like this image that you see in the corner, all mixed up and moved around and tangled. It's a mess, right? And so, my suggestion as you start to think about engaging in these conversations about your pain or where you're at or what you need with your people is to get it off your chest. Get these thoughts, these feelings, those pesky little voices that I mentioned out of your brain and somewhere else, like literally off your chest, because when they are on your chest, it feels icky and gross, and it can actually contribute to some of these physical sensations of pain and distress. And so it will be very helpful to get them off your chest before you share with somebody else, to help you organize your thinking, to check in about your feelings that arise when you talk about these things that you're preparing to share. And once you know what parts are more easy, more difficult, you can better prepare for the conversation. So this is kind of like pre-share preparation. So I know a lot of people that I work with, and myself personally, kind of have a spiel, we'll say, in terms of what it was like when we first started feeling the way we were feeling, and when I first got a diagnosis, and what it was like for me navigating that situation, and how I wanted to talk about it or not really want to talk about it. And so I've kind of curated a story, a spiel. And if I hadn't really got it off my chest first, then I might not have realized that certain parts of the story were more kind of emotionally charged. They maybe made me a little bit more upset. It might have been a little bit harder for me to articulate what I was trying to share with a person because emotions and feelings were just getting in the way. And so by first getting it off your chest, you're sort of starting to process that information, which will likely make it easier for you to share those thoughts and feelings with other people. But also you can decide, oh, this is something that obviously is still impacting me a lot. Maybe I'm going to leave this part out of the conversation, or maybe this part only feels safe to share with these specific human beings. And so it really does allow you to organize what you're dealing with on the inside so that you can present it most effectively on the outside. And there's no right way to do this. You can handwrite it, you can journal, you can type it on your computer, you can leave a voice memo. You can traffic talk, which is what I call it when you're just like stuck in the car or you're on a drive and you're going to be there for a while, and you can kind of curate a couple of things like the temperature surrounding you and what's playing in the background in terms of music to kind of create a soothing space for yourself, and just lean into the thoughts and feelings, but also say out loud what you're thinking of saying as practice of speaking those words out loud. And again, checking in with yourself to see, how did it feel? What things came up for you? What parts felt surprisingly difficult or surprisingly easy? And once you do those things, it can be helpful to read them back or listen to them. That can be very cathartic. Also, some people might want to write it out and then rip it up, destroy it, flush it down the toilet, hide it, or save it for just another day in a safe space, so that they can share it with someone at another time. But if you are planning a conversation and planning the actual conversation, something that you might say to a person when you're starting that planning process is, well, I'm available on this day of the week, right, Sunday afternoon, to talk, and would love to plan on chatting then. I will let you know on Sunday how I'm feeling and if I need the conversation to happen over text or just to reschedule for another day so I can rest. So you're kind of setting the stage for yourself and for them of when you intend to have that conversation. That way it gives you time to prepare and kind of surround yourself with all the comforts that might help make that conversation a little bit easier. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But also to prepare them that you don't necessarily know how you're going to feel on that day, because you don't necessarily know how you're going to feel at any given moment of any day. And so that morning you'll check in and you'll let them know if you need to reschedule, have it for another time, change the modality. As someone who has pain in their face and who speaks for a living, sometimes I need to just not move my face and not talk. And so texting can be really helpful. So, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to completely stop or eliminate the possibility of a conversation, but maybe just change the modality. These are some prompts if you are writing things down in terms of curating your story or preparing for a conversation and you really like the feeling of getting it off of your chest. These are some journal prompts, but again, you don't have to journal them. You can voice memo them, type them into a computer, traffic talk them, but these are some things I recommend kind of walking yourself through to see what's going on in that tanglement that happens up top for us. Describe a time when you were happy, relaxed, having fun, and your pain felt a little less bad. What are the things that lift your mood? What relaxes your body? What relaxes your mind? What's distracting for you? What emotions trigger your pain? And what situations trigger your pain? Are there certain people, places, times of day? And these prompts are not just opportunities to sort of organize what might help contribute to and minimize your pain, but also build insight, because maybe you're reading some of these prompts and you don't have an answer readily available because you just haven't thought about it. And that's perfectly fine. That's the purpose of having these prompts, is to sort of explore what comes up for you when you think about them. And once you figure it out for yourself, you can more effectively communicate those things to others so that they can better support you in times of need. Let's say you're fully prepared, or as prepared as you can be, right? All we can do is our best. And now you're in the conversation. So now during the conversation, as the person in pain, it's not your responsibility to manage the emotions of others. That is something that I want you to remember. So share your feelings and your thoughts and your experiences however is best for you. There's no right way to do it. There's no one way to do it. It is just whatever works best for you. And so I want to empower you to do that and remind yourself that while the emotions of others are obviously going to impact you, it's not your job to regulate or manage other person's experiences. So let's say you're sharing and all of a sudden you start to feel those emotionally charged memories that I was talking about before, get the message too much, or maybe someone starts asking you a lot of questions that you're not prepared for or you're not comfortable answering, and you just don't want to answer in that moment. So here are a couple of just practical start and finish statements that you could use to communicate how what's going on is making you feel and how you'd like to navigate that part of the conversation. So you could start with something like, hey, I'm feeling pretty drained, and end with, so I'm gonna relax. I'm gonna go outside for a little bit. I'm just gonna hang on the couch for a little bit. I'm gonna reach out soon. Thank you so much for listening. Kind of an all encompassing, this is how I'm feeling, this is what I'm gonna do, this is my plan for future contact, and some appreciation to round it out. You could say something like, talking about this stuff always takes it out of me, but enough about me, enough about this. What's going on with you? You can flip it. You can keep the conversation going and leave it more open-ended if you don't have something specific in mind. And then the last one, I appreciate your interest in the details. Thank you so much for being engaged and wanting to know more. I appreciate that so much. And I'd love to kind of shift gears. Let's talk about X. And if you have something in mind that you would like to talk about, feel free to throw it out there. Again, boundaries are so important. Remembering you don't owe anyone an explanation for anything as they're coming up with these questions that they might have for you that you might not know the answers to or feel ready to answer, and that's totally okay. Remembering also that boundaries are tough. Boundaries, especially new boundaries, are tough to think about and agree upon just within yourself, implement as any person in a conversation or within a relationship, and also to receive as the other person in a relationship. Um, Pre-preparation, pre-share, those kinds of activities I was mentioning before are going to be great opportunities for you to start figuring out what your boundaries are and practicing how to communicate them to your people. Remembering that no is a complete sentence. It's a perfectly acceptable answer to use if you don't want to engage in further conversation on a particular topic or any topic or conversation at all for that matter. And as much as, we hope that some of these um, tips and talking points and examples help engage in effective conversations beyond just today, the fact of the matter is that sometimes you might not leave a conversation feeling like it went the way that you hoped it would. Maybe you don't feel like it was successful, and that's okay. That I hope that doesn't prevent you from trying. And also, once you take the steps and go to the places and do the things that you feel you need to get comfortable again, I encourage you to try again. But boundaries are really important. Remembering and reminding people of what your boundaries are and reminding them that when you say what you say, that's it. Like if you've communicated to them, I've shared my story, I've shared what I've intended to share, and I don't want to really talk about it anymore. That's it. If you shared what you want to share and you're open to questions, let them know, and that's how they should move forward. And if you've shared what you want to share and you're done talking completely and you want the conversation to be over, that's valid too. I wanted to add in a little bit of grounding, just so that you felt like there were some things that you could take from today in terms of the pre-share, the actual conversation, and also the processing afterward, just to support bringing yourself down to exactly where you are, reorienting to the present, being grounded in where you are can be very helpful in terms of both physical and emotional pain, but just stress in general, which a lot of times these conversations can be, if not only because of the anticipation of how it might go and the ways that it might go wrong. So I like to break it down into the five senses. That's something that many of us can recall and reach for, if not like literally reach for, use internally and tap into. So I gave a couple of examples of each. And so when you're doing the journal entry or having a traffic talk or actively squirming in a conversation or fielding questions, maybe tap into some of the five senses as listed here and see if that helps. And I recommend also kind of just practicing these things when you're not in a high stress or high pain situation, because that's going to make it more readily available for you to reach for, more easily accessible when you are feeling overwhelmed, because it can be very difficult when you are kind of fully immersed in stress to reach for a coping skill or something that's going to be helpful. So in terms of sight, a lot of people report that watching movies, reading, taking or looking at pictures, or altering the lights. I have light that changes color behind me that feels super relaxing to me. Sound, certain playlists. Maybe it's a playlist that feels the opposite of the way that you're actively feeling and you're trying to redirect your attention to that sound, but also something that leans in directly into a feeling. So if you're feeling sad and you need sad music to kind of allow yourself the permission to sit in that feeling, maybe cry a little bit, that can be really cathartic. Audiobooks, different sound machines to be very relaxed, or a guided meditation. Touch, engaging in soft materials, things that squish. Temperature, like a hot soak, a shower, ice packs, pets or furry friends. Smells, like scented candles, flowers, diffusers, stickers, scratch and sniff, and taste things that are sweet, things that are sour, spicy, familiar. That's a really good way to engage your senses into a distraction. So if I always have at my office like warheads for all of my clients, super sour, fireballs, mint gum, things that will literally pop them out of the moment. And if not for longer than a second, at least it's a much welcome pause, and it might allow a little bit of space for us to kind of get in there and redirect into a way that's more effective. So highly recommend the five senses. I'm a self-proclaimed five sense fanatic. I love it. Now, this is for the listeners that are here. I want to validate for you that it's a normal urge to want to follow up and ask questions when someone's opening up about something, including tough stuff, right? We want all the details. And some people do find that it's really helpful to share their whole story, go through the spiel, and then answer all of the questions. But it is a case by case scenario, and it's best to let the person who's sharing take the lead. If you're left wanting more, you can ask the person who's sharing if they're comfortable with you asking more about their experience. And I've kind of laid out two options if they say yes or if they say no. So if they say yes, let them know upfront and then remind them often that if at any point during the conversation they're feeling drained, tired, overwhelmed, you can talk about something else, or just simply end the call or text and chat again later. I know, as someone who experiences pain and has had conversations about it, sometimes I'm so in the zone of sharing my spiel that I'm not actually checking in with myself and how I'm feeling or how it's going. And I've had other people check in with me being like, how is this for you? Like, how are you feeling right now? How does this conversation feel for you? And then I'll kind of recognize that I'm like breathing a little bit more heavily. Maybe I'm sweating. I'm uncomfortable. And it's not anything that's overwhelming, but it is something worth noting. And I was so immersed in like, I've decided I'm sharing this right now. I have to just get through it, that I wasn't really paying attention. And it was such a lovely question to be asked, because it communicated to me, at least, that that person was like really being thoughtful of my experience, not in just about what I was sharing, but how I just like am actively living. And so it was lovely to hear that. And so I highly recommend trying that, just as a reminder to the people that are sharing that if at any point they're not feeling like they want to share anymore, that's completely acceptable, and you can stop. And if they say no, you have to be prepared as the listener to honor that immediately. If they say no, full stop, period. You can talk about what might be helpful in it, an alternative type of conversation, and you can offer, or they can provide things like maybe a new topic or a funny distraction or listening to music together or watching something on Netflix together. But being prepared for both yes and no, and recognizing what you have to do to honor the person who's sharing their preferences, because it is their show, so let them lead. It's so important as the listener to validate, like validate. And there are different ways to do that. So I'm going to go over both verbal and nonverbal cues that you can engage in as the listener. But this is, just for anyone in conversation. Verbally, you can say things like, okay. Nonverbally, nodding and leaning forward. You can use reflection, so reflecting what they've said back to them. So maybe me, as a person in pain, might review a doctor's appointment that I had and say, oh, I did all this preparation. I wrote down all the things I wanted to say, the questions that I had, but then I got there early and the provider was late, and I didn't get into there until an hour later. And by the time we met, it was like quick, and I didn't get to ask any of my questions. I just kind of got ushered out of there. And I'm not saying any feeling specifically, but in the way that I'm delivering it and the content of what I'm sharing, the listener could say something like, oh, that sounds like it was really stressful, or oh, that sounds really frustrating, oh, that must have been so annoying. Those things reflecting what they're saying back to them, again, while nodding and leaning forward, communicates to the person who's sharing that you're actively engaged in what they're saying and you're following along without projecting anything particular from your perspective onto the story or the person. You're simply just listening and receiving what they're saying and then reflecting it back to them. And that reflection is very validating. So validate all the time as much as you can in any conversation, not just conversations about emotional or physical pain. It really makes a big difference. And you can also thank them for sharing. I think that they're not necessarily going into the conversation looking for a thank you, but it does feel nice to hear. Now, let's say as the listener, you've had the conversation and the conversation has ended and you're kind of left processing that information. A lot of things that I hear from people who are the listeners are, now what? What do I do now? I would say, number one, do your research, especially if someone's sharing a diagnosis. It might not be specific to a diagnosis. It might just be, this is what I'm going through, and not have a particular label. But if there is a diagnosis, do the work. It's not the responsibility of the person sharing to give you everything. Keep in mind that every experience is different, even within a singular diagnosis. My experience with trigeminal neuralgia is different than another person's experience with trigeminal neuralgia. So I recommend checking into blogs and podcasts and social media accounts where people are sharing their firsthand experience, because things like WebMD or the Mayo Clinic, while super informational and very helpful, it's not as humanistic an account. And then if the person who's sharing feels up to it, feel free to ask them, what their personal experience has been like after you've done a little bit of research, because that shows that you've followed up, you've taken initiative, you're not expecting them to do all of the work for you. And then again, it'll be up to them whether or not they're feeling ready and willing to share. Number two, learn their do's and don'ts. What meds does a person prefer? In what situations, depending on a medium pain day, a flare day? What foods and drinks help and hurt? Do they prefer ice or heat? Do they have a favorite movie to watch, music to listen to, clothing to wear? These are all going to be really helpful in knowing how to respond or be supportive when you see them in active pain, or they're communicating to you that they're in pain, because as many people in pain know, it can sometimes be very invisible and people aren't necessarily going to know what's going on or that you need something. And so by having conversations like this before a sort of a crisis situation or a flare day, it can be easier to support person who might have something that they want or need, because then you don't have to go through an entire interrogation of all the things that they find to be helpful and not helpful. You kind of can just display the options that they've already reviewed with you and just be like, this one, I don't know, which one? You just choose. They don't even have to speak. They can just point. So that can be really helpful. And to recognize that even if you are a medical doctor and you specialize in the diagnosis that this person has, if you do not have chronic pain, if you've personally not experienced it yourself, you're never going to be able to truly understand what it's like. And that's okay. You can still be an amazing support to a person even without the lived experience. The last one is pretty tough, and tough for everyone involved in the conversation. Sometimes there's nothing that you can do. Hopefully, it's validating, even though frustrating to both parties, the sharer and the listener, that there's not always a quick fix to the problem, and you can share in those feelings. And as they say, sharing is caring. In the mindset of doing things together, I have a couple of mindfulness activities that you can engage in both on your own, but with a partner or a family member or multiple family members, multiple friends. redirecting thoughts with distractions like these might not eliminate the thoughts or feelings or pain, but it might, as I mentioned before, provide this much needed break. And even just like an inhale, exhale of a break from focusing on something that we're experiencing can be really, really valuable. So, some of the activities you can prompt a person in pain to do with you include something I call coin toss. So, if you take a bunch of coins, the same type of coin, so a bunch of pennies, a bunch of quarters, nickels, dimes, whatever your preference, get them in a group together and kind of shake them on the table or on the floor in your hand, whatever you have access to, and then each pick one of the coins and spend 30 to 60 seconds really paying attention to the coin, like looking at it, looking at the grooves and the divots, what is special about the coin, unique about the coin, what the date is, are there any markings, any tarnishes, and then after 60 seconds, put it back into the pile, mix them all up, and then see if you can find your coin, like who can find their coin the fastest, because that's going to, again, ground the person in a very mindful way to the present of just actively examining this coin in a way that we might not usually, but hopefully that pulls attention away from the emotional or physical pain that they're feeling, and again does it as a group, so that person isn't like, oh, I have to figure out how to manage this myself, and the person who is trying to support that individual is like, what can I do to help? So inside outside sounds is an activity where you close your eyes, keep them open, whatever your preference, but you are attending to and then can share with other people what sounds you can hear inside, like a stomach growling or a stuffy nose, and outside of the body. So inside, outside, inside of the body, outside of the body. So, the sound of my shirt rubbing against itself, a sound machine outside, a car that drives by. Those are inside outside sounds, and again, trying to bring yourself to the present and away from the distressing thoughts and feelings. The ABC game, one of my favorites. I use this a lot with my teen clients, but honestly my adult clients like it as well. And you can do this with just yourself and your brain, like self-talk. You can do it with one other person, or the amount of people you can include, endless. You basically choose a category and then you go one by one around in a circle, trying to name and something in the category using each letter of the alphabet. So if we were doing animals, I would start with A, so aardvark, and the person next to me would do B, so bear, and then cat, dog, elephant, so it goes. And people can choose really difficult topics, so it's harder to think about. They can be funny topics, allows for humor, which always makes things better, or at least for a second, a laugh can be a reprieve. So ABC game, again, internal or external with a group of people if you like. Mindful eating, similar to this coin toss idea, but with an item of food. So in my office, I'll use like a Hershey Kiss, something that you can unwrap. So you're going to do it as mindful as possible. So you're going to hold the Hershey Kiss, for example, in your hand, and you're going to look at it, and you're going to examine it for longer than you ever thought you could look at a Hershey Kiss wrapped before. Like, what are the divots and the groups of the wrapping? Is it fully covering the Hershey Kiss? Is there something about the flag that you notice? The shape, the color, the fade, all of it. Then you open it up. What does it sound like when you unwrap a Hershey Kiss? What does it look like now that it's just the chocolate? Are there dents or divots or malformations of the Hershey Kiss itself? What does it smell like? What are you imagining that it tastes like? And then slowly putting it into your mouth. Is it starting to melt? Does it taste different than you thought? Does it taste really good? Does it not taste good? Chew it. What is that sensation like? It's really stretch it out to a place where some people might be like, that feels obnoxious. Maybe. And also can be highly effective in being mindful, grounding you, and being distracting. And that can be done with, a variety of food and drink, kind of the opposite of like sitting in front of a TV and like just eating chips while you're not thinking about it. And then slowly you realize, like, where did all the chips go? Because we just don't pay attention to things like that. So the opposite, and being really mindful when we eat. a never-ending story. So that could be sort of like the ABC game, people sitting around in a circle, could be just yourself, you and one other person, or a group. And every person says one word of a story that then continues, or every person says one sentence of a story that then continues, and scribbles, sort of like the drawing that I have here. Each person has their own colored pencil, and someone makes a scribble or a squiggle, and then another person takes that and tries to make it another shape, and somehow you end up with a painting or a piece of art that looks like a combination of both people's stylings and ideas, and you know, is something that you can kind of hang up and look at. Oftentimes a very funny process, again engaging this humor. You can also just not make it something that is looks like anything. I'm a terrible artist, so I would have a very difficult time taking someone's squiggle and making it something else. So you can just do more squiggles and then color in like the little blocks, so it looks like this abstract piece of art that you created together in a time of pain, but created something kind of beautiful. So that can be really nice. And again, promoting this togetherness so that you're not having to go through this alone. This last slide before we get to the questions is for times when people are quiet. And that can happen a lot too. And that's part of having conversations about tough stuff. It's not just the things that we do say, it's the things that we don't. So, for the people who stress about how long it's been since they've reached out, wondering if people are upset with them because they've been extra quiet, hoping that no one's noticed, and if they have, maybe it's not a really big deal. All real thoughts that I have had because I've just been inactive on social media or on text messages or calling people back when I'm just not in a place to do so. I say this to you: cut yourself some slack. You are going through it, right? Tough stuff is hard. That's why it's called tough stuff. And ultimately, you are the expert on how you're going to get yourself through this as unscathed as possible. So if you've deemed conversation to be low on the totem pole, that is your right. And go ahead, you do that. Also, reach out to your people. Of course, this conversation is promoting conversations about pain. So the recommendation, of course, is for you not to have to go through this alone. I wouldn't want you to do that. So think about the people that you chose. You chose them for a reason, right? Let them remind you why you did that. And for those who are waiting in silence, wondering what's with these unread text messages, or worse, how come these text messages are being read but no one's responding? Like, why are they going unaddressed? To you, I say, feel your feelings, right? It's valid for you to also be a little bit upset in that this person has been ineffective in their communication. You're not a burden for also having those needs, and it's your right to have them be taken into consideration as well. Also, remember that every person gets overwhelmed at one time or another. So, I want you to be patient with your people. And once that patient wears thin, because we are human beings and that is going to happen, reach out. Gently remind your people that you're thinking about them, that you're there for them, that you want to dedicate some time to reconnect. And that kind of allows for that person to sort of engage, as we do full circle moment, into this share preparation phase of like, okay, this person wants to talk. They've indicated that they are accepting of what's going on. They're validating that they recognize that it's tough and also that they miss me. And so they want to have a conversation. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're looking for a conversation about what's going on specifically. It could be to talk about something totally unrelated to that physical or emotional stress that you're in. But yeah, let that be a spark that perhaps motivates you to start that pre-preparation phase and gets off and gets go into that conversation. This concludes my presentation. I see someone just posted that they have to sign off. So nice to have you here. Thank you so much for joining. For people who can't stay, but I think we're going to have some time for Q&A and then open it up to the audience.
Great. Yes, we'll now move into Q&A. So as you're sending in your questions in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and start off with some questions. So as a person living with pain, sometimes it can be difficult having these conversations with parents, people who may be older or hold a different power dynamic with you. How do you recommend handling those conversations when you feel like they might not
Yeah,
understand?
I think it's a great question. And it's important to remember that it is scary to enter into these conversations with anyone, much less individuals that are older or there's like a power dynamic in place. I think for one, it's important to recognize cultural implications. Every family has its own structure and cultural implications that will impact them. So, being mindful of that as you enter into those conversations, as you prepare for those conversations, and also as you
Mhm.
process those conversations, to just be mindful of how everybody's coming into it, and also to be sort of patient and compassionate with your people, because the truth is they might really not understand. And that's to speak to the fact that what I mentioned before, they might not actively have chronic pain, and in that way they'll never truly understand and might not be able to grasp it in the ways that the sharer is sort of looking for. But also with a little bit of patience and compassion, those people can get there. So me giving them a little bit of time to sort of digest the information, do some of the work on their own, and then hopefully re-enter into the conversation with you as the sharer, to have those conversations, but also from a frame of mind rather than thinking of it as, okay, I'm going to have this conversation with this person because I want them to do this, right? I need them to do this. Thinking of it as,
Mhm.
I have thought about what's going to make my life, my world, my space more welcoming and better for me and my needs. And that's how I'm going to enter into this conversation. It'll more likely be successful if you enter into it from that frame of mind versus the alternative.
Hmm. Okay. The other question I have is, as a caregiver or loved one to someone living with pain, what can someone do in the very moment their loved one is in pain, in a pain flare up? How can you help without adding burden?
You can have conversations beforehand, about what they prefer, right? Like the hot or
Mhm.
cold, are there particular foods or scents or textures that are really helpful? What type of music do you like to listen to? That way, when a person is in an immediate need, they don't necessarily have to even ask those questions. They kind of already know what the person's preferences are and can kind of line them up and be like, which, just point to which one you need. And then
Mhm.
also a really quick way to do this, which I find to be very effective in all conversations, is ask if a person is looking for comfort or solutions. You can just say comfort or solutions. Are they looking for nothing but you to sit next to them and, put their arm around you, or just be like shoulder to shoulder, or even in the same room, or talking to them or distracting them? Or do they need you to run around and be like, do you need heat or ice or this medication, or need me to run out and grab this? Because they might have some insight in that moment of which one they need, and then you don't have to guess. And it's 3 words: comfort or solutions.
That's a great place to start. I wouldn't have thought about that. And that kind of goes off of another question that we were asked in the
Mm-hmm.
chat is, apart from being super observant, how do we ask them about their do's and don'ts without making it seem like we're prying into their personal lives?
Yeah, I mean, you can say that. I don't want to seem like
Mhm.
I'm prying. And again, remind them, like, if this question is not something that you feel ready or interested to answer right now, like, put a pin in it. It's just something I'm thinking about, right? Because as the listener, like, again, valid that you have your own thoughts and your own questions. You can put them out there. You just have to be prepared that they might not be received and be ready to share or answer that question. But you can say, I'm just
Mhm.
wondering, now, and even say something like, because I don't want to bother you in the middle of a flare, right?
Mhm.
I'm thinking that's not the time to do this, so I'm just going to put it out there now, and you can decide what you want to do with it. What kinds of things are really helpful when you do feel really overwhelmed? What are the things that I might be able to do when you're in that space that does feel helpful or does feel effective?
Mm. The next question that I have for you is, I know at Flowly we have found that exploring activities together as a family or unit to create memories and neural pathways of joyful experiences can be helpful. Are there activities or exercises you suggest a family does together?
Yeah, the mindfulness activities are a great place to start, and also kind of along the lines of those memories and neural pathways. Coming up with a memory together can be really helpful, both in that moment and after the fact when you're alone as a person in pain. Whether the people around you bring it up, like, oh, do you remember that time? And usually it's like a positive experience, something funny. Maybe there's an inside joke that's involved, or the person in pain might be like, oh, I was just thinking about that time where this happened. And whoever's recalling the story, everyone should kind of jump in and participate and work to enrich the memory with the five senses. So, like, what do you remember it looked like? It smelled like? Were there scents that were involved? Is there something that you remember seeing or touching or tasting? And once you do that, you're like fully enriching that memory, which is only going to strengthen those neural pathways that you mentioned. And so, not only is doing that together, like just doing an activity together and promoting that support and togetherness, but that person now, when they're alone, can both reflect on the time that the memory actually occurred, and it's going to be enriched not just by their own perspective but from the perspective of the people around them that they love. But they can also reflect on the actual moment when the enriching memory activity took place, which is going to be much more recent and much more readily accessible for them to recall, both likely to make them feel really positive and serve as a redirection for their attention.
Wow, great. And how would you recommend new heroes integrate Flowly into their healing and recovery journey?
Or so many ways, all the ways, really. I mean, you can do it in the moment, right? When you're feeling in crisis and an emotional crisis and a physical flare,
Mhm.
that's when you can, engage in your Foley activities. But also when you're feeling okay, when you're feeling a little bit more stabilized, when your pain is not in full flare, those are the times that I would also encourage you to just engage in the activity, because you're sort of practicing in a way this regulation, and you're reminding yourselves and tuning into these soundscapes, these visual scapes. You're learning your inhale, exhale patterns so that in times of stress, you're not needing to figure out like how to get it going, how to log in, how to fully engage in the experience.
Mhm.
Even if you don't have Flowly accessible to you in the moment, you can sort of imagine those soundscapes, those visual scapes, and practice your inhale, exhale to the pattern that you typically would when you're engaged in Flowly and maintaining that flow state. So it can, it's helpful both just when you are on an average Monday, just like getting ready for bed or preparing for a situation that you might anticipate is a little bit stressful, to sort of regulate
Mhm.
yourself and get yourself most ready
Mhm.
for that experience to be as successful as possible, and also in those moments when
Mhm.
you're actively needing regulation, because you're in high distress.
Okay. I would love to shift over to answering some of the questions we got in the chat.
Sure.
We have one here. It's stating, how would I start this conversation with family who refuses to believe that I have a diagnosis? I've been diagnosed as an adult, and I realized that so much of my childhood was my mother downplaying my symptoms, saying that everyone goes through it.
That's really hard. And that feeds, I imagine, right into that pesky little voice of, well, it's, not that bad. Other people have it worse. I think preparing that the conversation might not, to your point earlier, like be 100% successful, and that there is a chance that delivering that information might not lead to a complete change, an immediate understanding. Obviously, entering in with a little bit of patience and compassion for the parent, that there is a possibility that in this conversation they will, receive that information differently and take steps afterward to do the research and understand and recognize that this person is being really vulnerable and taking a risk. And in that way, kind of demonstrating the love and security that exists within that relationship, because they're trying to have that conversation despite the possibility that it's not going to go well, and then it might. Also, we have to be mindful as people in pain who are going to be positive listeners, right? So in preparing
Mm.
for not just how we want to share our stories, but who we want to share our stories with. Perhaps this person is not going to be the first person that you share with, or the person that you share with when you're looking for validation or understanding or comfort or solutions. Recognizing that not all of our people are going to be supportive in the ways that we need or are looking for in that particular moment, and building
Mhm.
insight as people in pain for who our network is and who's going to be best kind of useful for us in those conversations when we need it most. But very tough.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that as
Mm-hmm.
well. Um, we have another question here. They're saying, I'm the one in chronic pain, and the family member doesn't want to hear about my pain because they can't deal with the topic. So either stay away or don't talk about it. Because they can't see my pain, they disregard my pain as not real.
Mm.
So I hide my emotions from my pain. I don't know how to interact with the person about my situation.
Okay. Again, really tough. And I guess I want to clarify, because they can't see my pain, they disregard it. So I hide my emotions from my pain. Is that I hide my emotions related to my pain? Some people, I'll speak to my understanding of it. Some people, to your point, especially because it can be invisible, don't respond in the ways that we would like or we hope to our physical sensations because it's unclear. Unless I say out loud that my face is hurting, you wouldn't know that my face is hurting. But other people do respond a little bit more easily, a little bit better to emotional statements. So by communicating that you are emotionally feeling this way related to your pain, that might be a way to start the conversation. It's hard because emotions are also sometimes easily, covered up. We can have a neutral face and go along our day having a really hard one, but have a smile on our face. Um, so I think it's again hard to know exactly how to enter into a conversation with that person, because I can't guarantee that that person is, how they're going to respond at all. And the opposite point, right? If we don't try communicating with people despite that fear, and that anticipatory dread and all the things that we know about that person, that we tell ourselves it's not going to work, that person is not going to receive this information well, we don't actually know until we try. And so communicating, like giving it a go and seeing how it goes, will also give you information on how they are going to receive conversations like this. Um, and that will better help prepare you for future conversations, or maybe might be the information that you need that, unfortunately, and as additionally painful as this person is not a good resource in terms of conversations around your pain when you're needing to be validated or heard, or again looking for some of these comfort or solutions.
Mhm. Yeah. We have time for one more quick question. This individual is saying, to share my pain with my partner requires that I allow myself to be vulnerable. How can I get better at being okay with being in a vulnerable position?
I think to engage in some of those getting it off your chest activities can be a really great way to start, sort of like a gateway to vulnerability. That way you're being vulnerable with yourself, which you can manage and regulate a little bit easier, because we really don't know how other people are going to respond, how what we say is going to land, and how to regulate them. So doing things like journaling about the things that feel vulnerable or feel tough to talk about, and writing. And it doesn't even have to be like full paragraphs or this like beautiful novel. It can be singular words or scribbles or art or colors, just ways that allow you to like get it off your chest while you're actively thinking about the things that are vulnerable, which is just our thoughts and our feelings. And then recognizing what parts feel more difficult, what parts are emotionally charged, and surrounding yourself once you get ready to share with somebody with things that are very comforting to you, because no matter what, no matter how much you process it, it's still going to be a vulnerable conversation. By opening yourself up to a person, you are being vulnerable, and to support yourself while you're doing that, best to be in clothes that are really comfortable and make you feel really great. Have your favorite flavored tea and a snack that you're really looking forward to ready for you when you're done. Have, listen to your favorite podcasts on the way to the conversation. And these are things that you can do as you kind of explore those vulnerabilities on your own as well. Of course, as a psychologist and someone who does therapy for a living, I highly recommend also practicing with a therapist. That's sort of the point of having mental health support, is to literally be in a room practicing being vulnerable in a third party, non judgmental space that's going to allow for you just to kind of be like a bouncing board, um, with some tips and tricks included. So explore that as well.
Yeah. I want to say thank you, Dr. Arnoff, for all of your great insights today and your time, as well as everyone who joined here. We do have a follow up to Bubbles with Dr. Arnoff to go over any other questions you might have, or if you want to dig deeper into any specifics in the topic. We have one tomorrow at 10 a.m., as well as one on Wednesday at 5 p.m. You can join the bubbles in the home tab under the events. And thank you, everyone, again for showing up for yourself today and for others. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day, and we will see you in the next bubble and workshop.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.